Jesse Temple is here, Badger Connect. You can subscribe and follow all his coverage, not just to football, but all of the sports, not just basketball, but hockey's had some great volleyball coverage as well. And of course, you hear him on the camp with Zach. And I thought you and Zach did an outstanding job with your podcasting since this Maryland loss. Before we talk about the Maryland loss, can we just rewind like back to last Thursday or Friday and talk about the importance of that game and how badly they needed to not do what they did, how badly they needed that one just to further establish the stakes for anyone who maybe wasn't fully grasping or locked in last week?
I said it was as close to a must-win game as you could have in week 4. I didn't want to say absolute must-win. I said those are reserved for game 7s of an NBA Finals or World Series because if you lose, you don't get to play again. They do get 8 more games. Having said that, I think it was pretty obvious what the stakes were. You beat Maryland. You're 3-1 overall, 1-0 in the Big Ten going into your first of 2 bye weekends, and you've provided some semblance of optimism that maybe something will be different. Maybe it won't, but at least you get to extend this another week or 2 and see where the chips fall. Now you lose. Not only do you lose, you get embarrassed. You're down 27-3 until a Hunter Simmons touchdown pass late in the game, which really at that time didn't matter. And it's hard to see the path forward this year in terms of how many victories are left on the schedule. If you cannot perform at home against Maryland, are you going to beat 5 ranked teams? Are you going to beat Iowa or Minnesota or even Washington, which is playing good football? And I will acknowledge Maryland may well end up being much better than anyone was willing to give them credit for. They're 4-0 right now. They're 1-0 in the Big Ten. Their first 3 wins came against non-Power 4 conference programs. Having said that, Wisconsin very clearly is worse than people. I don't know if it was worse than everybody thought, but worse than some of us thought based on what we've seen here.
So I don't like to radio people, Jesse. We have sometimes a bit of a reputation. I don't know how you feel about this. Zach will give me guff on this. It's like, well, you guys just throw stuff around. You know, microphone warrior. You just scream into you don't go to practice. You don't talk to these people, and that's true. But one thing I actually am intentionally careful about. I don't like to ever suggest that players quit or that they don't care. And while I think sometimes players do quit and sometimes players don't care, it's really hard to tell if you're not in that building, and I think it's unfair. But I listened to you and Zach on the camp, and you didn't say quit. I believe the phrase you used was at the first sign of adversity, they fold like a cheap tent or a card table. Yeah. So expand on that idea a little bit, because I think that's like that game was over in the first quarter. If Wisconsin loses in a shootout to Maryland and it goes down to the wire, I don't think people are booing. They're certainly not leaving early, but the game was done before halftime.
I always think that's a slippery slope to answer the question about a team quitting because I'm not inside their heads. And I realize you could say the same thing about my commentary on how they fare when adversity strikes. On the other hand, you are what your record says you are what your performances say you are, and this is not a one-off. And if this were a one-off, it would be a bad look, a bad moment for the program. But you could at least point to something else and say, well, that's what Wisconsin football really is. And I can't tell you how often after a game you hear players say, hey, that's not us. And it's like, that's a nice thing to say, but over multiple years, that is who you are. And so all you have to do is look at what this is 29 game stretch has been since Luke Fickell took over and had his full complement of coaches, and it was his team in 2023. And as I said on the camp, find me the games that they won of consequence. They beat Minnesota in the regular season finale 2 years ago, and that game always matters, but that Minnesota team finished with the losing record. They've had 8 losses that you could say that was an embarrassing moment for the program under Luke Fickell. And I laid them out on the show, so I won't go over them again. But when those types of performances stack up, then I think it's fair to question the team's mindset. And I also think Luke Fickell himself acknowledged it after the game that when these things tend to happen, they just do not do very well. And ultimately, the players are the ones that have to go out and perform, but that's a reflection on the coach. Everything starts with the head coach, and he's responsible for having these guys prepared to face whatever's going to happen. And it's not worked so far.
What is Luke Fickell supposed to do? I wish as someone who is, I'm an opinion. I mean, I fill time on the radio. This job is not that important, but I guess in like I give opinions, I watch things and then I share how I feel and then take calls and talk to guests. I don't know, like, what am I supposed to say? What take am I supposed to say about Luke Fickell? Like, he needs to do this, or he's doing a bad job at this. Like, what is he actually supposed to do? It seems like he's just completely out of answers and ideas at this point.
I think it was noticeable even 2 years ago and definitely a year ago that no matter what we ask him, there's just not a real definitive answer. And I don't mean that in that they haven't searched for answers, but that nothing has worked. And so I can't put myself in his shoes and say, this is what I would tell the media. And this is what I would tell the team. I think ultimately the decisions you've made have been missteps along the way that perhaps in the moment you thought were right and ultimately were wrong. Because again, you go back to when he was hired and it was, wow, Wisconsin just got Luke Fickell, one of the hottest coaches in college football, the only coach who led a non-power four team to the four-team college football playoff. That's amazing. But the further you get into it, the more it's like, well, it's not that you can't be an outsider and have success, but he clearly didn't know much about this program and understand it. And I said, if you were looking for a silver lining and wanted to give credit, it's that he was willing to try something different by bringing in an air raid offense. And in retrospect, you can see that didn't fit here. And now you're on to your second offensive coordinator. I just, it's hard for me to say what he should be doing. It doesn't help when you've had an injured starting quarterback all 3 years, but at a certain point, you also have to say you've got to have good enough players who can overcome things like that. And there's 10 other guys on the field offensively, and there's 11 other guys defensively, and there are plenty of mistakes that are happening outside of quarterbacks. So it just feels like everything he's tried, everything hasn't worked. And ultimately, here's what I come back to, Grant, is a question of what are they better at now than 3 years ago? Where has there been improvement? Run defense has been real good. They're third in the country in run defense. Unfortunately for them, the last 2 games, that's because the other team hasn't needed to run the ball. They've been able to air it out. You had a freshman quarterback in Malik Washington throw for 250 plus yards, a couple touchdowns, no interceptions, and you weren't able to make him uncomfortable. So it's just across the board. Nothing is better. And maybe it's like development of players. And I know that's harder than ever now. But if I'm looking at every Sunday, you see on the social media accounts retweets of the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Giants and
Mhm.
all these teams with NFL players. And it's like, how many of those dudes were developed in the last few years? And that's not to say there haven't been NFL guys like Braylon Allen is playing for the Jets. Now, he was recruited under the previous staff, but they did such a good job previously of finding guys, developing them, and 3 years later, they were every bit as good as anybody else in the league. And now we just don't see that right now from Wisconsin.
Well, and Luke Fickell not having answers and there not being a clear and obvious sign of progression or improvement. I mean, that's probably why the players, when the game starts to go south, they probably say, screw this. If there was evidence that this was trending in the right direction, or if Fickell had his thumb on this, that, or the other thing, that would give something the players to buy into, right? That's human nature. If the players feel like this isn't working or this isn't trending in the right direction, then yeah, I'd probably fold early in a game too, right? Aren't those two things connected?
Probably. I also wonder, and sometimes this is hard to compare paper on paper, like talent. How talented is this group?
Yeah.
There's individual talent. So is it you can't bring them together as a team? Is that individual talent really just not good enough? And I also don't want to have this whole conversation without acknowledging how poor the O line has been. I mean, Luke can't go out there and block for people, and he's not responsible for injuries that happen along the line. But like, they can't do anything on offense because they can't run block. They cannot run the ball. They can't pass protect. Danny O'Neal got sacked 6 times against Maryland. Some of it self-inflicted. He's running backwards. He takes a 19-yard loss on 3rd and 12. But like,
Mm.
they're averaging 3.1 yards per rush, which does include sacks. But a year ago, when they fired an offensive coordinator, they averaged 4.4 yards per rush. That is just 3.1 is unheard of for Wisconsin. And if you can't do that well, which is supposed to be the one thing you could do well to start out with, everything falls apart.
Well, you've covered this team a long time, and there's been a lot of excellent O-lines, and you've watched that development. What are they lacking right now, specific with the O-line that was so prominent and so successful for so long?
It's tough. Experience that's not ideal, and
Is
we
that a
only got to
byproduct
see.
of just how college football has changed? You're just playing younger guys?
It's a lot of different things. I think about, and this is kind of anecdotal, right? But like,
Fine.
okay, they brought in Nolan Rucci and Trey Wettig, and granted, those guys were not having the roles that they wanted to play, but long time ago, guys would have stuck it out and eventually played. And I'm not saying they made a wrong decision. I think they made a right decision. They ended up going somewhere else and being able to play, but you lose some foundational 4 and 5 star guys, and then you're trying to fill those holes. And just the transfer portal in general, I mean, there are good things about it, but you're also taking a risk. You needed somebody because you had an injury to Kevin Haywood, but you brought in Davis Heinsohn, and it was a risk. He was 6'5", and you were putting him at tackle, which even AJ Blazik acknowledged in fall camp. That's not prototypical tackle length, and it didn't work in game one. And now they've been in a spot where they had to put 4 guys in 4 different spots, and Joe Brunner at left guard is the only one playing the same spot. And last week, because of injuries, you had 3 redshirt freshmen starting on the O line for the first time in a decade. So there are a lot of reasons for a lot of things, but yeah, I mean, it's just I feel like I don't want to be old man get off my lawn, but it is a different era of college football, and for whatever reason, this type of era seems to more drastically impact a program like Wisconsin, which for so long relied on fundamentals and development over time. And now that's harder than ever to achieve.
I would agree, and I don't think that's excuse making. I don't think that's anecdotal at all. That's a good breakdown. Jesse Temple is here. Badger Connect, subscribe to his work, and he's on the camp with Zach as well. I've been listening a lot this week. So the rest of their schedule is, as we've chronicled for months, it's really, really hard. The way that I've been talking about this on my show, and tell me if I'm wrong or add to this, they don't want to fire. They don't ever want to fire a coach. They don't want to fire Luke Fickell this year. Like ideally, Luke Fickell is leading the program and it's in a better direction week 1 next season. But Jesse, if they don't win another game, or let's say they win 1 game the rest of the year, like doesn't it get to a point where they don't have a choice?
Man, it's a really tough spot for this program right now because you're right. I Chris McIntosh obviously came out and offered his vote of confidence in Luke Fickell, which I think you can take that with a grain of salt. The alternative is saying nothing, which only fuels further speculation. Ultimately, you have to win, but his buyout would be such that it's prohibitive. It's $25 million at the end of the year, and I realize you can negotiate less money. Paul, that's what they did with Paul Chris, but just 3 years ago, you gave a coach double-digit millions of dollars to go away. $25 million would be the second largest buyout for a head coach in the history of college football. Jimbo Fisher takes the cake at Texas A&M, but number 2 right now is Gus Malzahn at Auburn in 2020, which was like $21.5 million. That is an astronomical amount of money. And at a place like Wisconsin, it feels like even more. Now, would you have to have the masses so riled up that people would be either willing to cover the costs, or I don't know what that would look like. Ultimately, I think he will still get to year 4.
I
Um,
agree.
but if you don't win it, if you finish the year 0-10, that is extremely difficult to defend.
In the
and,
Big Ten
and
specifically, you're saying.
well, I mean, they were 2-0, and they could finish
Oh,
two and
okay.
ten.
Okay.
So,
Okay. I gotcha. You lose the
so
10 remaining games. Yep.
yes, right. So that's very difficult to defend. And I think what you don't want, and Zach and I have talked about this, there's anger right now, but at a certain point, there's apathy. And that is the worst thing that can happen. When fans give up on you, you're not winning them back unless you do something magical. And right now, it's hard to see that happening.
Did you and Zach discuss, or have you guys covered the Barry Alvarez comments at all in your podcast?
We did. So we did our Sunday post Maryland game show, and then we did a Tuesday show talking about that. Obviously, him calling out fans and saying what he did about booing. And I mean, you just can't do that. And I understand he's coming from a good place because he's passionate about this place. And hell, the dude built it into what it is now. But fans have a right to do what they want to do. And I think where there is perhaps some gray area, or the thing I can understand, is when you've got fans chanting fire Fickle. On the other hand, if they're not there, you're not getting as much revenue for your program. People are giving up, and the players are getting paid money. The coach is certainly getting paid money. So um, it's not that you can do whatever you want, but you can voice your displeasure, and you have every right to do that if the product you've seen for years has not met the standards that you set when you said you wanted to compete for championships. No one hired a coach and said, well, we'd like to be able to get to some bowl games consistently.
Yeah.
That's not the expectation you put forth and put into fans' minds.
Well, and I listened to Barry Alvarez too, and I heard a little bit of maybe his coaching background coming through too, where he's like, "Hey, man, there's kids out there who are playing out of position, or they're reserves and they're not ready to play and they're playing." So I think there's some sympathy as a coach and player. Like I heard a little bit of that. It played terribly, and he's spoken this week and walked some of those things back, but. I don't know. The remainder of the season, Jesse, is pretty brutal. Over the bye week, what can we expect from you and watch for at Badger Connect, and then you and Zach on the camp too?
Yeah, well, I cover more than just football, which I suppose I should say thankfully right now. I know there's a lot of anger with football, but I have a one-on-one on Friday with Mark Johnson. Women's hockey is the #1 team in the country. They're coming off their 8th national championship under Johnson. And next week I have some basketball content. The next Badger Bites is an attempt to run the Bascom Hill with the basketball team. It did not go well, which was expected, but I'll also have a companion piece on the history of the team running the hill. I had a chance to talk to Bo Ryan, Greg Gard, and a handful of other people for that. So you can check that out at Badger Connect. And in a week and a half, they have to go down to Michigan and play some football. So we'll have more coverage on that as well.
At the big house. Well, at least you didn't pop an Achilles on the hill. I feel like, hey, if you didn't massively hurt yourself or fall on your face, like if I could get through it without doing either of those things, I would have been happy. So appreciate your time, Jesse. We will talk to you next week and get ready for for Michigan, I guess. I'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, Grant. Talk soon.